We are live now, and thanks so much for waiting. Sorry about the delay. My name is Robert Baines. I am the president of the NATO Association of Canada. The NATO Association is dedicated to making sure that Canadians understand the value of security and the importance of NATO. It's not something that most Canadians think of on a day-to-day basis, of course. That's a great thing. We don't have to always consider our security, but we should consider that very fact, that it is something that we can take for granted, and then we have to make sure that we don't. So a lot of fun with the NATO Association being able to do that, to bring you speakers who will talk about the importance of international engagement, how security affects us on a day-to-day basis, and the various people who are working on that security day in, day out, without let up. It's really an amazing group, and I'm honored to be able to be joined by three outstanding panelists today, as well as one of our research analysts, Antalya Papatia. She has been an analyst since last year and a great member of our team. Antalya, would you mind doing the honors and introducing our panel?
Sure. Thank you, Robert. But before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to thank one of my fellow research analysts, Nicole Doherty, for helping me with this event and really being extremely helpful. So thank you, Nicole. And with that, I'll introduce the panelists. MP Leona Alleslev was first elected to the House of Commons in 2015 and was re-elected in 2019 as an MP for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, Ontario. And she has served on various committees and has served as chair of the Canadian NATO Parliamentary Association. In 2018, Leona was appointed Shadow Cabinet Minister for Global Security. In November 2019, Leona was appointed as Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition and was shortly named Shadow Cabinet Minister for Foreign Affairs, along with serving on various committees. Prior to serving as an MP, Leona was a Canadian Air Force officer, a senior manager, and an entrepreneur. Next, we have Silvana Huaman, who is an international marketing professional with a broad experience supporting dozens of companies in developing businesses throughout Canada. As a lead generation expert, Silvana has contributed to the success of organizations in economic development, education, and banking. She specializes in comprehensive digital programs that support the TriStar team's sales efforts. Silvana co-founded TriStar, working in developing its operations and validating product market fit. Silvana earned her international business and finance commerce from Concordia University in Montreal. And last but not least, we have Brigadier-General Carla Harding, who joined the military right out of high school in June 1990. Upon graduating from the Royal Military College, she was posted to No. 2 Service Battalion in Petawawa, where throughout the years, she is proud to have served alongside the exceptional soldiers of No. 2 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group and the Army at large, both here at home and abroad. In 2001, just prior to 9/11, Brigadier General Harding was posted to the National Defense Logistics Coordination Center, which was a start to her logistics career. In addition to supporting deployed operations as a desk officer, she also has operational experience with NATO in Bosnia and 2 tours in Afghanistan, to name a few. Key highlights of her career include postings as a Army Logistics Career Manager, Army G4 Operations, and most recently as a commander of the Canadian Forces Joint Operational Support Group. Brigadier General Harding currently serves as the Director General Support at Canadian Joint Operations Command. Thank you all three for joining us, and Robert, now back to you.
Thanks so much, Antalya. I think it would make sense if I'm going to ask 6 questions to the panel. I would love to have a bit of crosstalk, but I'd also want to make sure that you all get a chance to say your piece. What I'll do is just to start off with the order that Antalya introduced you. So Leona, and then Silvana, and then Carla, if you don't mind. And then I'll ask each individual question. We'll finish the 6, and then Antalya will start with some of the questions from our YouTube audience. If you are watching this live, there is the capacity to ask some questions through the YouTube messaging function at the side of your screen. So with that, I'll start off, as I mentioned, with Leona. It's the inevitable COVID question, and how you think COVID is changing how different organizations approach logistics. How much will it have a lasting effect and impact on how logistics are addressed in the future? Is it suddenly kind of a celebrity position that people had not usually taken seriously, and now suddenly everybody realizes it's one of the most important aspects? What's your general take on it?
Well, thank you very much, Robert, and I'm sure that Carla would agree with me. Logisticians are one of those people that are always overlooked, and yet, boy, oh boy, when you don't have them, you realize just how important they are. So I think that's actually the key message for our country, particularly in light of security, because what we've seen is that we didn't really understand our global supply chains as much as perhaps we needed to. We don't understand what critical items we have in the country and what reliance we have on other countries. We've also, I think, seen that perhaps it's not as prudent for us from a security perspective to be equally dependent on all countries around the world, that some are more concerned about safety and security than others. I mean, we have seen where we've been given defective equipment, which wouldn't actually meet our own Canadian safety standards. So I think it's about understanding where our critical items come from, not only for health supplies, as we've seen in this crisis, but also what kind of reliability there is around that and what kind of standards there are about that. And so we are totally committed to a global supply chain, but at the same time, I think we have to have a conversation now around what does self-sufficiency look like, and do we need to be able to have some of that manufactured here in Canada? Do we know what those critical items are that we need to be able to have at home? And for those things that we're getting from other countries, are we ensuring that they meet our Canadian safety standards? And I think we need to look at sort of all of those things. So I think there will be a lasting impact around the conversation about what do we need to produce here? What are we comfortable with bringing in from other countries? Are we ensuring that stuff is meeting Canadian requirements, and how vulnerable really are we? So yeah, I think this is going to have a very lasting impact, and I think we need to talk about what those relationships are with our other countries in this regard. So thank you.
For sure. Well, as far as stress tests goes, this is a pretty good one, I think. And Silvana, I gather you must have encountered a tremendous amount of logistical challenges in the defense industry and in the commercial realm more generally. What have you found as some of the major lessons, and are people taking this seriously now? Your mic is off.
We never get used to this, huh? So yeah, as Leona mentioned, definitely a strong point about reliability and relationships. In our case, in business logistics, we started seeing as early as of December 2019 that our lead times with our foreign manufacturers started becoming longer and longer. And it posed a lot of difficulties for us. So very early on, we started looking at different sources for our parts and our manufacturing our pieces for drones. And we learned that there were, especially here in Quebec, where we have a strong aerospace industry, there were competitive prices, there were competitive suppliers that we could work with. And oftentimes what we forget to factor is precisely that, the relationship, the reliability, the agility with which we can communicate with a supplier who is in your same time zone, who speaks your same language, and with whom getting across your requirements could be a matter of one day of back and forth versus maybe a week or more with a foreign supplier. So that was our big lesson that we learned the hard way, but that was an important lesson to learn quickly. And that's my main takeaway from it.
Thanks so much. And General, I can't imagine there have been many implications for the military.
Why, Robert, I have no idea what you're talking about. It was just, it was easy peasy. No, in all honesty, so I found the last 6 months absolutely fascinating for a couple of reasons. And the first one is I think people learned how to spell logistics. These are lexicon, these are words that were never in the forefront of individuals' minds, things like supply chain. And like I explained to the team here, in January, a pair of gloves to us was like a pack of blue pens. You never counted it, you never thought about it, you just purchased it and they were everywhere to be found. And then all of a sudden, we got this turned on its head. What was the most obscure piece of material also became critical: cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, toilet paper. And so what it did is it not only redefined what logistics is I think it caused everyone, both either at work and in their own homes, to reevaluate the fragility of their own supply chain. And I think there became a deeper appreciation from where your material comes from. And then I think it also came with it a bit of fear when we realized that you honestly don't know how deep the supply chain is for your most bare essentials. So I think where you look at is what is going to be the lasting impact. We all were looking for data. We desperately wanted to have a data-driven decision-making cycle. And then we realized the data wasn't there. And I think what you're going to see the impact coming out of COVID is the desire to have numbers, the desire to be able to do analytics, and the ability to understand where your pressure points are. And I don't know that we're all going to be able to do that. And I think it needs a bit of strategic patience because we can't turn decades of systems on like overnight. And I think it's just going to be with time. So back to both Silvana and Leona's points about looking at onshoring some capabilities. I think we fundamentally know where we want to go with logistics in the future, but we need to make sure that we make the right choices, because not just because gloves were urgent in January doesn't mean that they're going to be urgent in December. And we need to be wise with the choices that we're going to make, it be as a government department or as industry. And I think that's really the assumption that I saw is we went down globalization for a very good reason, and we need to make sure that we just don't throw all of our efforts away. Over to you.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'd like to pick up for the next question. Just you're mentioning, General, of the necessity to reevaluate pretty much everything. Now, when we talk about some of the changes that have already been made, I'd be interested to hear from all three of you what you think are some of the more significant. Leona, as a member of Parliament and a member of many committees, obviously the communication aspect must have been huge, but what are some of the other changes? I do love watching the committees over Zoom. Like, it's for you, what is the biggest impact and some of the changes that government has made so far? Let alone reevaluating where we're gonna have to go?
That's a tricky question because I think we don't know what we don't know, and we are still in the process of learning. I think that there's a lot of people that I've talked to who believe that the government had a lot of systems and structures in place that unfortunately we've seen throughout this pandemic that maybe those weren't as solid as we as Canadians expected them to be, or we need them to be. So I think we haven't made the changes yet. I think we're in the process of understanding that from everything from having a pandemic plan where we were monitoring the situation, our stockpiles, our response to that kind of basically national issue, emergency, the next time it might not be a health emergency, but the fact is that we don't really have comprehensive, coordinated national plans. And we had stockpiles that had expired equipment. And that's highly disconcerting. We had a global health information network that gave us advance warning about a pandemic, and we got rid of it 2 years ago before we needed it. And then the economic information that we had, we didn't realize that to the same degree that we needed 60,000 temporary foreign workers to come into the country to look after our agriculture. So that, I think, was a bit of a surprise for a lot of people. Or the number of people who are not eligible for EI because they don't have quality of jobs that allow them to have some kind of backstop. And yet when you get into an emergency situation, which is of course why we have employment insurance, that isn't there. So the good news, I would say, is that a lot of these vulnerabilities have been highlighted, and we now understand to a greater extent what we don't know. I think the challenge is we don't have the luxury of time to figure out how to mitigate it. And so we are going to have to do some really structural things very quickly. Everything to understanding who are our trusted international trade partners who follow the same trade rules that we do, and quality standards and reliability and dependability, versus those critical things that we do need to do ourselves, versus what's the role of government, and yes, what's the role of the military. We're talking defense and security. We brought in military personnel to help us in the health sector, the long-term health care sector. We need that military for aid to civil power to be able to be that surplus capacity when we need them. And they do a fantastic job, but I'm not sure that we've given them all the tools that we need them to have to be able to provide that kind of support to us. So I think the takeaway is we still don't know what we don't know. And when we get through this pandemic, I think we have to make a commitment to all of ourselves to figure that out, to put those plans in place, and to really be more prepared for the next occasion. Hopefully there'll never be one, but there always is some kind of emergency. And I certainly don't want to see my country this vulnerable again. Thank you.
What a perfect snapshot of the constructive criticism of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. Outstanding. That's what we're here for, right? Silvana, switching streams a little bit, just about what are some of the changes that your business had to make, and how is that different from what you were doing before? You were talking about searching out new opportunities. What other changes have been, actually come into being so far?
Yeah, definitely. One of the big things that we have developed plans for now is how do we use our facilities. Now, being a hardware company, we need to have our engineers working in our office, with our equipment, in our labs. So that hit us pretty hard, pretty quickly with the lockdown, because we suddenly didn't have access to that anymore. And so we had to plan for certain people to take certain pieces of equipment and parts of projects to their own home so that we could keep working during those 2 months of lockdown. And now that means for us that in our current locations, well, we have to make sure we implement the proper physical distancing for employees, those employees who do not need necessarily to be in the office. Most of the management team, all the management team is working remotely right now. So what the implications of that are pretty big, because that means that if we need to prepare for, say, a second wave or another situation like this, we need probably to have a bigger or more flexible location, so that we can spread out more the teams, and we can manage to continue operating without a full stop like we saw before. So this definitely adds costs to our company, and we can't, as a startup, continue operating as lean as we were before. But this is how we prepare. Yeah.
And General, how about yourself? What are some of the main changes to what you were doing before, and How have you found that, even just personally and as an organization, the military? It's a fascinating thing to try to figure out how much things have changed.
So interestingly enough is while there was change, there's also things that were the normal. So we have the benefit of understanding what force health protection is. We talk about it on a regular basis. We talk about health and safety. We talk about hygiene, because for all of us is the minute you get large groups of folks sick, it becomes a debilitating effect on combat effectiveness. So this wasn't a new conversation within the military community. It was just about understanding what the new normal was going to look like. And we've been operating from the get-go. Even when it started with the evacuation of Canadian citizens out of Wuhan, and then the holding of them at Canadian Forces Base Trenton, as early as January, we were having discussions about how to use PPE, about social distancing measures, the public health measures that PHAC has been speaking about. We have been at the forefront of this curve because we've been doing business throughout all of this. There wasn't really this quarantine period for a large element of the Canadian forces. And so, interestingly enough, it's what we've seen is we've seen gradual evolutions over the last 8 months of how to deal with the evolving health crisis. And I know even the discussions in the workplace is we've had the, when do you wear a non-medical mask? When do you wear PPE? And ironically, as a logistics officer, I think I spent more of my time talking about face coverings than anything else, but it was good. And so where we are currently in the position is we've realized that it's the most basic things of life that now change the way that you're doing business. How many people sit in a car? How many people get on a bus? How many people can eat in a mess hall at the same time? And so similar to Silvana's point about time, money, all of these adjustments just mean that you're going to have to reframe the way in which you do business. So it means that you need a few more people for deployed operations because everything will now take that little bit more time. One of the initiatives we did in June is we deployed a camp outside of Canadian Forces Base Borden, and we set it up so that we could actually study the changes in human behavior as a result of COVID on a camp environment. And then we took those lessons learned and we sent them to our deployed operations. We use it to inform training started up because everything is going to be just that slightly bit, everything's going to take a little bit longer. And I think what's really important, especially in Canada, as we're about to move into the going back to school season, is just understanding that you need to have patience as we work our way through this, because it's about having that force health protection. It's about putting those social measures in place just to keep us at a nice, low and consistent level within the country so that we can get restarted. And so I think when I look at the change within the organization, it's been slow, deliberate, but the focus has been on sharing of information so that you can learn from the little tricks of the trade from one to another. But I think the easiest thing to understand is when you start your planning, you can't use previously held assumptions. You have to start from scratch every time. Every country is different that you're going to deploy to. Every action you do is just going to be different. And so the biggest challenge for us is no one has historical knowledge to draw upon. It's all about using the brain, which is great. It's my favorite way of doing mission analysis. You start fresh and you don't be blinded by the factors of history. So I think that for us is the most significant of our changes. Over to you, Robert.
We don't have to worry about fighting the last war pandemic because everybody who was in that is long gone.
It is all a fresh slate. And it's a different set of criteria this time around. It's fascinating.
For sure. All right, so General, I know you have to leave by 12:50, so I'm going to just try to ask our last question so we can get some from the attendees. But I would be remiss if I did not ask the question about those who are interested in breaking into logistics. And I know that all three of you are in very different aspects of it, but all three of you have significant experience. And one of the questions that we asked was, logistics has traditionally been seen as a pretty male-dominated function. But what are some of the challenges that you've experienced and overcome as a woman in the field? And what advice would you give to a young woman who's looking to break into it? Lots of people looking at this now, and it seems that the sky's the limit. So I'd love to hear, Leona, what do you think about it yourself?
Well, the really cool thing is that we've got two people on the panel who basically started their career in exactly the same place. Both Carla and I, of course, went to Royal Military College, and I was an Air Force logistician, and Carla is Army, but our training is essentially the same. And not that I want to make a plug for the military, but the military has very, very comprehensive training for logistics, from food services, finance, transport, and supply, and the processes, procedures. It's a very comprehensive way of looking at logistics, and I think that not everybody understands just how cool logistics is. It's just about everything to everyone, and yet something everybody needs, and yet something that certainly those fighter pilots don't think they need, but boy, let me tell you, they do. So my advice would be, it's an incredible career. I would recommend it to anybody. The sky or the service battalion is the limit. And so if you are remotely interested in getting people and things places, and making things happen and problem solving, because remember, logisticians are the people you come to when things aren't working. Most of the time, not necessarily when things are perfectly working the way they should. So if you're like any of that, my recommendation would be absolutely go for it. Now, the caveat to that is it absolutely is challenging for women, because it is a male dominated. So you have to understand that it's going to be challenging, and that you can do it anyway. And that's the advice I would want to give. But I also would want to give advice to men, because ultimately women in male dominated environments is not a woman problem. It's kind of inadvertently a man problem, because they're the ones who don't often see the strengths of women, because they look slightly different in some respects, unconsciously, to men than what they see in other men. So lots of times when I've been in senior management meetings, when we've been attracting and retaining people to be promoted or to go into an organization, and totally unconsciously, the guys will start talking about sports or something like that, and we'll walk away from the meeting, and the candidate they will prefer is the candidate that they felt more comfortable with, because they had that rapport right off the bat, even though both the female candidate and the male candidate were outstanding. We need to make sure that people in those hiring situations understand that unconscious bias, and might find just as many things to have a rapport with as the woman in the room, as the man, and just to be thinking about it a bit more. And diverse teams are incredibly powerful, and like anything that's really successful, take work. And so my recommendation to women is never back down. You're going to have a great career, and it's worth your time, attention, and focus. But also to the men, make sure that you see sometimes what you may not be totally aware of, because women add as much to your team as the men. Thank you.
Great message, Leona. Thanks so much. Silvana, how about yourself? I'm afraid your microphone's off again.
You got me again. I was saying that in my case, well, I'm exposed to logistics because I'm a co-founder, but it's not directly like my main role. I would say that in our organization, We have reviewed a lot of what was mentioned by Leona, the culture, the language we use in our job postings and how we communicate, so that we make sure we include and make more comfortable women who apply. This year we hired 6 new engineers, and the number of applications from women were maybe a 10th. And we feel that we need to do a little bit of there's some adaptation we need to do to encourage more women to be comfortable in the industry. You know, women make 7% of the drone industry right now, and that's it's a young field, but I feel like in different domains, this is something that we can work on to improve diversity.
Certainly. Thanks so much for that. And General, I'm sure you've got a bit to say as well.
Possibly. Thank goodness I was on mute, because I was like dying laughing as Leona's talking, because I hear that. It's the I'm very proud to be a logistics officer. I've done it since the day I joined. I will say that Leona, considering that I had to do infantry training, and I know you went to Comox, I'm not sure that we really got the same training. But you know what, I appreciate where you come from. I laughed when I read the question about it being a male-dominated field, because inside the military, it is one of the fields that's most occupied by females, ironically. But interestingly enough, I think it's because a lot don't understand what logistics is. So inside the Canadian Forces, we group the entire support community inside logistics. It includes our human resources clerks and our financial support personnel, versus what industry thinks more pure logistics, which is warehousing and distribution, or in our lexicon, supply and transport. And in that one, I would argue they're still very male dominated. But I think the nature of it all is changing. And I think it's because we've realized that logistics isn't just a series of disparate functions, such as a port here, a warehouse here, or a trucking company here. But there's a greater understanding inside industry that it's an end-to-end system. It's a capability that is started to know as a supply chain, and where the real talent is required. And this is where I recommend folks who are trying to get into the industry is focus less about the actual physical labor parts of the industry themselves, but instead focus on the integration of those pieces, because that's what business is seeking. That's what we in the military are seeking. My profit margin, I measure in terms of operational readiness, not dollar value, but the principles are exactly the same. You want to know from end to end, where's your material coming from? Where's it going? What day is it arriving? Is it arriving in the quantity I'm looking for, so that I can deliver the operational effect that I need in order to achieve my mission? The logistician in the community are the ones that they need that data from them, so that these key operational decisions can be made in a timely manner. And that's what everyone's seeking. They're seeking the answer. So you have the two parts about it. You have, as Leona said, oh my God, it broke. Somebody please fix it. And then you're at the meeting and they turn to you and go, you can fix this, right? Like, sure, like I do all the time. But the real talent that comes from the logistician is the planning. And it's about getting the information, and it's about getting the quality of the critical thinking into the planning in the front. You want your inventory positioned where it will do best for you. You want your distribution capabilities, be it air, sea, or land, able to pick up that inventory and move it to your point exactly when you need it for success. And so when I look at how to encourage people to go into the field of logistics, not just women, but men as well, it's about getting them to understand is logistics underpins everything we do in life, our personal, our work, and it doesn't matter what industry you are. And if you've mastered the art of logistics, then you essentially can do anything you need to do in life. I've been doing this for 30 years. I will plan you the best barbecue at my house you'll ever be able to find, because I do it every day as a living. It's about getting all those unique little pieces together to deliver an end effect. I do want to talk on the mentorship piece though, because similar to Leona, I got to where I am today because of talented men who have brought me along as a mentoree. And I think in this field, because we work in so much gray space, the mentorship and the diversity of the team is what's critical. When you are dealing with an ecosystem that has so many moving parts in it, the more diverse the experience and the more diverse the team, the more effective that you're going to be able to understand what the system itself is and how to manage and maneuver it to achieve the effect that you want it to do. So I always tell someone to go logistics, because at the end of the day, I will always have a job when I take off the uniform. Others may not. Anyway, over to you, Robert.
General, I think I heard right. Did you just invite us to a barbecue? I kind of think that's what we're expecting now.
Well, we have to talk about your ability to select wine before you get the invite.
All right.
But she also said time spent in planning is time saved.
Correct.
All right. Well, our next NATO barbecue will definitely have you all involved. I'll pass it over to Antalya now. Antalya, I think we have another question from the floor for the General specifically.
Yes, we do. Thank you for that, Robert. This question is for you, General Harding. Is the facility that was set up outside Camp Borden permanent?
No, it is not. It was only set up for 7 days, and it was set up just to examine what we needed to do in terms of a deployable camp, and then they collapsed it and they moved it back down to Kingston.
Perfect, thank you. And this one is for everybody. How do companies or organizations mitigate the negative human impacts of global supply chains and international sourcing? How about we start with you, General, because I do know you have to leave shortly.
All right, thank you so much for letting me tackle that one. In all honesty, I think we have to look at it from two ways. You have to understand substitution. Do you really need that specific critical part, or can you accept a substitution? And in many times we've gotten into the where we have a specifics in our mind and we'll only accept that particular item. And I think we need to be really we need to be more accommodating as to what will do the job just as well versus getting fixed on history, as we said. I'm very concerned about global supply chains, mainly because I don't think we know where everything comes from. So even as you're sitting and you're looking at, as COVID spreads around the globe and you're watching hotspots pop up around in obscure locations, the fact that we don't know whether or not that location will impact our global supply chain worries me, right? Because everything starts with a mineral that comes from somewhere. And I think what we're going to realize as we come out of this in the years to come is that people have a better understanding of just how global the material that they use is. And in some cases, it'll be a bit more of an encouragement or a drive to either buy in Canada, buy local, or support the communities around you. Over. And with that, I'm going to actually do a thank you very much. I need to get over to another location. Thank you so very much for inviting me here. And I wish my my IT skills would have enabled me to join earlier and get the conference started earlier. But to Leona and Silvana, thank you so much for your comments and your points. They were great use to me, and I've learned a lot just from the few short minutes that I've had with you guys. So thanks once again, and good luck with the rest of the panel. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, cheers, General. All right, I believe Antalya, you have a few other questions.
Sure. Leona, Silvana, do any of you want to take a shot at the question I just asked the General? I can repeat it if you wish.
I don't think that's necessary. I think that's a very important question. And I think that to also look at global supply chains in terms of our own vulnerability and security. We have looked at bringing stuff in because we thought it was cheaper and all that kind of stuff. But now, certainly with climate change, there's a cost to shipping things all over the world, and not even just from here to there. It goes to somewhere else to be built into a component, which then goes to somewhere else to bring, and by the time it gets here, it's traveled all over the world. And so I think that it's about understanding where all those pieces come from, understanding that there's a cost, both in terms of the environment as well as in terms of money, in understanding that there's probably quality costs as well, because we don't necessarily check that they're all lead free or toxin free or pesticide free or all the things that we have done to protect our own society, but that we don't necessarily check because there's just so much stuff that comes in. And then there's the corollary to that. Who owns what in our own country? And do Canadians have access to all the things that we're producing in our own country for our own needs? Or are we at risk, vulnerable there as well? So as we see from this pandemic, there are actors around the world who are using this to actively expand their national interests. And sometimes those national interests are at the expense of some of our national interests and our Western values, democracy, rule of law, and all those kinds of things. So to separate that supply chain from the defense and security aspects, or from the Western values and things that we think of in terms of the freedoms that we enjoy, I think we have to be careful not to do that, and to take one more look at what's important to us, what do we need to protect going forward, and how do we do that and still be a citizen of the world and still have global supply chains, but not putting ourselves at risk as perhaps we have in the past, because we just took it for granted that we were going to have another 70 years of peace. Thank you.
Silvana, I'm not sure. Do you have any points on that at all?
Yeah, I think definitely in evaluating the human impacts of our global sourcing, traceability is something that we should look into very carefully in selecting our suppliers and all the different costs, either to the environment or to the human capital itself. Sometimes when they're foreign suppliers, we are not too clear on whether who's actually doing the work, or whether they have health and safety policies implemented. So that's something that should be part of all of our planning.
And from a business point of view, I mean, that is a vulnerability in and of itself as well. I'm sure it must come into your calculus as an actual business decision, not just something as far as our values are concerned.
Yeah, definitely.
I should notice, just before I tell you your next question, I should especially let Leona know, NATO itself has been taking a much closer look at this challenge, shall we say, of supply chain security. I think it was April 15th, the last defense ministers NATO meeting, the discussion did come up about the One Belt, One Road initiative, how this might be maybe not malicious in every case, but it does tie up what would otherwise be supply chains for our countries. If suddenly a port is no longer available or is no longer active because it is now serving someone else's needs, despite the fact that they may have paid a lot of money for it, it is a critical infrastructure point. Leona, I'm not sure.
I think that's brilliant, and it's something that, again, we've somewhat taken for granted, that we can get stuff through and to wherever we need to get it. But now we're seeing that there are critical assets that are owned by certain countries, and even within our own country, some of the challenges with our own ability to get stuff, oil and gas for one thing, where we've had to put it on a boat from Western Canada to go all the way south, all the way through the Panama Canal, to come all the way back north again to get to New Brunswick for a refinery. So what happens if we don't have access to that Panama Canal? What happens if we don't have access or are hindered at some point in our access on that path? And that's just one example, but you're right. At any point could goods coming from anywhere in the world where they have to go through train, rail, air, ports, anything that's not controlled independently or objectively puts us at risk. And so, yeah, we are having those conversations with our allies, absolutely. But it's something that is escalating, I would say, as we see, again, the rise of great power competition and global expansion around security and national interests. So very excellent point. And also the technological edge, but that's probably a topic for a different meeting.
Definitely. And Taya, please go ahead. I think Silvana and Leona, do you have, say, an extra 10 minutes or so, or do you have a hard stop? Hard stop. Okay, 5 minutes. Let's, and Taya, please go ahead.
Sure. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities of e-commerce?
I'll be taking that one. So for us, well, COVID-19, yes, highlighted the need to be, we're originally a B2B company, and we specialize in power management systems. So it required for us to rethink how to put all that information online in a friendly way. So we have been working on a new website, on a website that's also transactional, which we didn't have before, to be able to be findable online and for people to find it more easy to buy or to pre-buy our products and technologies. So definitely the challenge is that it takes a lot of time. And well, I'm very happy to announce that in a couple of weeks, we will be publishing our new website. So I invite you all to stay tuned and look at our social medias and all the news that we'll be posting. Yeah, that I would say that's the main challenge, finding all the people to gather the content so that it is well explained, but not too technical at the same time. And then also organizing all of the automation behind it so that the question from one client who found you somewhere online can get to one of your sales reps in due time, and the sales rep can answer the specific question with the right tools, with the right media. So that would be my answer. Thank you.
And if I could, I'd like to jump in here as well, because I think that's been a major lesson learned for us in Canada. We have places in Canada that just don't have the bandwidth and the access to internet. And the same way that 150 years ago, we needed to build a railway to open this country so that we could get goods and people anywhere in the country, or say telephone lines, where that was the mechanism of communication that was fundamental to every corner of Canada and the growth. We are now in that same situation. We're a big country with not very many people, and certainly now with the digital age, we absolutely have to have digital infrastructure across this country, and we don't. And it has to be, in my opinion, secure and sovereign. We have seen the increase in cyber attacks, asymmetric threats. We've seen CRA just get hacked, and with the new emergency benefits. We know that our networks, for the most part, that data is not being stored in Canada. How vulnerable does that make us to the manipulation, data manipulation, to IP theft, to the undermining of the infrastructure that sends messages to hydroelectric power plants or whatever. So we have been, I think, a bit naive in not seeing how drastic those threats are and how critical it is as we transform into this digital economy. So from access for everybody at a high level to making it secure and sovereign so that it's looked after by Canadians for Canadians, the ability for government to communicate with citizens, but also for citizens to communicate with other citizens. You think of our Gmail, that's not ours. So why we had Canada Post, so that you could send a secure letter to someone and you knew it was going to get there and you knew it was a priority within Canada. We need to have that same mechanism for digital infrastructure. So I think that that has to be one of the key things we take away from this, not only because we're in a pandemic, it just highlighted the fact that it's missing and just how much it's holding back our economic growth as we transition to compete in the world. So we need to get on it pretty darn quick because it is so foundational to our economic and security success going forward.
Yeah, well, that'll be our kind of final thought there, because we are running right up until 1 o'clock here. But I did want to mention that I would be remiss if I did not draw attention to NATO's logistic success. Interoperability itself, the ability for 30 countries to be able to exchange equipment, personnel, in the case of COVID, medical supplies, planes, hospitals, all sorts of different important material and personnel have been exchanged between NATO countries during the COVID crisis. Hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but that's usually how it happens. It's just executed without a lot of fanfare. That is one of the things we're trying to do a little bit better. But I would very much like to thank Antalya. What a great job of asking some of the questions from the floor and for organizing this, along with Nicole Doherty. Thanks so much. Silvana, Leona, an absolute pleasure to have you here. Great discussions, and shows how strong our depth is in Canada, with just so many people dealing with a lot of complex issues with leadership and integrity. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining, and as well, thank you to Carla, who unfortunately had to drop off earlier, but thank you both.
Indeed. Feel free to
all the best.
Yeah, keep in touch, and if you want to get more involved with the NATO Association, we're always thrilled to have more people.
NATO Association is very important. Everybody get on it. Take care.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks so much.